The Discovery Channel's Man vs. Wild is a staple survival television show, captivating audiences with its thrilling adventures, extreme survival tactics, and host Bear Grylls' charismatic persona. Viewers watched in awe as he braved the harshest environments. Bear did everything, trekking through deserts, scaling mountains, and even drinking his own urine to stay hydrated. But over the years, questions have surfaced, namely, how much of Man vs. Wild is real, and how much is staged? Like many reality TV shows, Man vs. Wild walks a fine line between authenticity and entertainment. While Bear is undeniably a skilled outdoorsman, the show has faced criticism for exaggerating dangers, staging certain scenarios, and providing behind-the-scenes assistance that wasn't always disclosed to viewers. Some episodes showcased Bear battling the wilderness alone, only for later reports he had received help from the production crew. However, that doesn't mean the show was entirely fake, but it doesn't mean it's completely rooted in reality either. Bear Grylls comes from a privileged background that is likely inaccessible to the average adventurer. He learned to climb and sail from his father, who was in the Royal Yacht Squadron in the UK. Bear also learned how to skydive and do karate as a teen via the Telegraph UK, which anyone can do in theory, but few people have access to planes for regular skydiving. It's worth mentioning that Bear served in the Territorial Army and British Navy, which no doubt improved his survival skills, as military service often does. Man vs. Wild's locations are all real, meaning that Bear actually traveled to places like the jungles of India and the volcanoes of Hawaii. However, since many viewers felt like the show was staged, multiple episodes of Man vs. Wild Season 1 were re-edited to include a new voiceover from Bear and to remove elements that felt inauthentic, like Bear being completely alone in the wilderness. A spokesperson for Man vs. Wild clarified that while some elements are functionalized, the show is not an observational documentary series, but a how-to guide to basic survival techniques in extreme environments. Via the Times of London, while most of the show is staged, Bear had to brave the extreme weather in places like Alaska and the Arctic Circle. In the Season 4 episode, Alaska, Bear had to hop to safety after dangling from a glacier. Both the freezing conditions and the glacier's height were clearly real. It's just the element of danger he faced while hanging from the glacier that was staged. However, Bear does actually eat the outlandish food needed to survive in unforgiving environments. Over the course of Man vs. Wild, Bear has consumed everything from intestinal fluid to his own urine. However, in a Man vs. Wild BTS secret, Bear revealed that the worst thing he ever ate was raw goat testicles. Of Man vs. Wild is exaggerated in one way or another. The show does begin with a disclaimer that Bear Grylls and the crew receive support when they are in potentially life-threatening situations. However, usually, the creatives behind the show try to up the danger factor to keep viewers on the edge of their seats. Sadly, adding fake danger is a tactic used in multiple other survival reality shows. In the Season 1 episode, Mount Kilauea, the element of danger was especially over-elaborated. While trying to traverse the dangerous lava fields, Bear comments on the smoke rising up from the lava. Specifically, he said the smoke was sulfur dioxide, which, in large quantities, can be deadly. However, the crew simply used a smoke machine to create the smoke coming up from the lava, effectively making it look like Bear was surrounded by deadly elements, which he wasn't. But the volcano is not the only instance of the Man vs. Wild crew stretching the truth. In another Season 1 episode, Sierra Nevada, Bear tried to lasso what the show referred to as wild horses native to the California mountains. However, the horses he encountered were actually trained. Survival expert Mark Wynett debunked the notion that those horses were wild in an interview with the Times of London. Waynett said, via the Times of London, one of the biggest inaccuracies in Man vs. Wild is that Bear stays in local shelters or actually out in the wild when filming the show. Bear actually stays in nearby hotels while the show is filming. Bear is, in fact, not completely alone in the wilderness, but rather has a full film crew and survival experts around him. The show had to go back and edit episodes so as not to imply that Bear was braving the elements all by himself. Significant preparation goes into each episode. The crew, including Bear, spends about a week scouting out an area before the cameras roll. Plus, Bear spends at least 2 days undergoing survival training before an episode starts filming. The additional preparation put into Man vs. Wild makes it one of the fakest survival the Discovery Channel. Bear has even admitted that a lot of Man vs. Wild, despite claiming to be spontaneous, is actually planned. Bear told Entertainment Weekly, "I get a really good briefing before we go. I know there's a big river there, there's gonna be a great cliff climb there, there's loads of snakes in those rocks, watch out for an alligator. So I do have a good idea of 80% of what's gonna happen." In the episode African Savannah, Bear finds himself at a loss for food while trying to survive in rural Kenya. After he fails to find anything to eat, Bear decides to drink the liquid from a piece of elephant feces. He claims that elephant dung can carry essential nutrients, which are essential for survival. However, it is not possible to consume any nutrients from elephant droppings unless said droppings have been soaked in water, via MovieWeb. If someone were to actually consume elephant feces, as Bear did on Man vs. Wild, the person would actually become very sick, and their survival in the wilderness would be compromised. In 2008, Bear officially apologized for any inaccuracies or exaggerations presented on Man vs. Wild, saying, "The truth is much less exciting." He claims that so many elements of Man vs. Wild have to be exaggerated to make the show look more exciting, via BBC News. However, if Bear Grylls and the team behind Man vs. Wild are concerned with making a show that's based on real survival techniques, the truth should be paramount, not something that is able to be tampered with to engage viewers. If so many elements in the show, like Bear's lodging accommodations and the constant danger he faces by himself, are actually fake, then Man vs. Wild has no business calling itself a reality show, because the show is simply not based in reality. Man vs. Wild. How much of the Bear Grylls show is fake versus real? Explained. Man vs. Wild. How much of Bear Grylls show is fake versus real? Explained. Its premiere in 2006, Man vs. Wild has become synonymous with survival television. With British adventurer Bear Grylls at the helm, the show promises heart-pounding stunts, life-or-death scenarios, and a first-hand guide to surviving some of the planet's most unforgiving environments. Whether he's leaping into freezing rivers, squeezing water out of elephant dung, or climbing sheer cliffs with makeshift gear, Bear Grylls has captivated viewers worldwide. But as gripping as the show is, many have asked, how much of Man vs. Wild is real survival, and how much is just made for TV drama? Over the years, controversies and confessions have peeled back the glossy exterior, revealing a mix of genuine skill, cinematic enhancement, and the occasional outright fabrication. Here's a deep dive into what's real and what's not in Man vs. Wild. The premise: a one-man survival machine. Man vs. Wild presents Bear Grylls as a lone survivalist parachuting, rafting, or hiking into remote wilderness areas with nothing but his clothes, a knife, and maybe a flint. Over the course of each episode, Grylls supposedly braves extreme conditions, builds shelters, scavenges for food, and demonstrates survival techniques that could save a real adventurer's life. But this presentation, Bear versus the Wild, solo and unsupported, is one of the show's biggest embellishments. Reality check. He's not alone behind the scenes. Bear is never truly alone. A camera crew follows him closely, often comprising a cameraman, sound technician, and occasionally safety consultants. The crew doesn't just film. They sometimes help set up stunts, scout locations ahead of time, and intervene during dangerous situations. While the presence of a crew doesn't invalidate Grylls' survival knowledge, it does mean the risks are more managed than viewers are led to believe. And crucially, it means the line between demonstration and real danger is often blurred. Staged survival scenario zone of the show's most heavily criticized aspects is the staging of supposedly spontaneous survival situations. While Bear Grylls does perform many of his own stunts, several scenes have been choreographed or rehearsed in advance. Fake. Jumping into quicksand or lava tube. Several natural hazards featured on the show, such as quicksand traps or collapsing caves, were either created or enhanced for dramatic effect. In a now infamous episode set in Hawaii, Bear descends into a dangerous lava tube that, as it turned out, had been rigged with smoke machines and pre-cut rocks to make it look more perilous. Similarly, quicksand pits have been artificially constructed in controlled environments to show how to escape them. While the techniques Grylls demonstrates may be valid, the danger is often simulated. Staying overnight in the well episodes often show Bear Grylls bedding down in makeshift shelters, curled up in animal carcasses, or perched in tree branches to avoid predators. Viewers assume he spends entire nights in these uncomfortable or even life-threatening conditions.